Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. I'm excited to finally be getting into the signs and wonders in the book of Exodus. Today we're in Exodus chapter 7, beginning in verse 8, and we're going to be looking at the first sign. Now, I know you have heard these called the 10 plagues, but as I mentioned in another video, I think there are more than 10 and the Bible does not call them plagues. So I'm going to persist in calling them the 12 signs and wonders. Signs and wonders is the way that the Bible refers to these events in Egypt. The Bible never numbers them and telling us that there are 10. And as I count them, the literary design of Exodus seems to include, in addition to the 10 traditional plagues, it seems to include the first sign where Moses' staff turns into a snake and the drowning of Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea, or Sea of Reeds. So I'm going to include those two in with the traditional 10 for a total of 12. And today we're looking at number 1, or we could call it the preamble or the prologue to the traditional signs. I'm going to read first from my own translation of the Hebrew so that you can get a bit of a flavor of what's going on in this passage. Starting in verse 8, Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "When Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, 'Give a sign to prove yourselves,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and throw it before Pharaoh. It will become a sea serpent.'" So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as Yahweh commanded. Aaron threw down his staff before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a sea serpent. I'm going to stop there and comment on these first 3 verses of this sign. The first thing to notice is that Pharaoh asks for it. Sometimes people struggle ethically with the signs and wonders that God brings upon Egypt because some of them are quite devastating. And I think it's worth noting that Pharaoh is the one who says, "Show me who you are. Give me a sign." So the word that I've translated here as sign is actually the Hebrew word mofet, which is usually translated wonders, but it sounds a little weird in English to say, "Give me a wonder." So the idea is he's asking for a miracle. He's asking for a tangible display of Yahweh's power, because this implies that if Yahweh is powerful enough, Pharaoh will listen and believe. But we especially need to notice that Pharaoh is asking for it. The sign that they're going to perform for Pharaoh is the same sign that God commissions Moses with when he's back at Mount Sinai. So Moses had asked, what if they don't believe me? And they say, Yahweh didn't appear to you. And Yahweh says, "What's that in your hand?" He says, "A staff." And God says to throw it down. So this is in chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. And that is the sign that we're now seeing Moses perform before Pharaoh, Moses and Aaron. So he's taking a staff, they're going to throw it before Pharaoh, and it will become here's the surprise, a sea serpent. So in chapter 4, the word used to describe the snake is nachash, which is the typical Hebrew word for snake. But that's not the word we see here. So God commissions Moses to throw down a staff to become a nachash. But when they actually do it, it becomes a tanin, which is a more fearsome way of describing a serpent. And it's usually associated with the sea. So a sea serpent, something monstrous, something more threatening. And so this is what they do. They go to Pharaoh. They do just what Yahweh commanded. That's interesting to note too, because Pharaoh's the one demanding a sign. But Moses and Aaron act in obedience to Yahweh, not in obedience to Pharaoh. Now, a snake is really important in Egypt. You might have noticed that just about every image or pictured carving of Pharaoh, every statue, has a snake right on his forehead, like a cobra rearing its head. The snake was a symbol of royal authority in Egypt, and the staff was as well. So I'm going to put up a picture here. You can see this is King Tut in his coffin. It's decorated with a snake and he's holding a staff. So both of these are symbols of royal authority. So by using these symbols, it's a very pertinent way of answering Pharaoh's request for a sign. Oh, you want to know who has power? I have more power than you do, and I'm about to show you what that power is. Last weekend, I was on a flight and I watched a documentary, a National Geographic documentary about the lost treasures of Egypt. And I learned in that video that the statues of Pharaoh that are placed all over Egypt, each Pharaoh would create statues of himself and he would set them up. And I learned a couple of things that just fascinated me. One of them is that each of the statues would have the name of the Pharaoh engraved on it, usually as like a necklace and as a belt buckle. And the statue was not considered animated or effective or magical until the name was put on. But if you wanted to decommission a statue, then you shaved off its nose and knocked off the snake on the forehead, the uraeus on the forehead. So that would be a way of decommissioning it, making it non-magical, non-effective. And so this scene is especially fascinating in light of that, because as you know, to anticipate where we're going to go with this next week, the snakes or sea serpent of Moses and Aaron ends up swallowing Pharaoh's sea serpent. So in effect, decommissioning him and his power. But I want to explore a little bit more why we have a sea serpent in this scene. And I think it might be because of its uniquely Egyptian resonance. So later on in the prophets, in Ezekiel 29:3, Ezekiel 32:2, and Isaiah 51:9, Pharaoh is metaphorically likened to a sea serpent. So I'll just read you one of these. In Ezekiel 29, verse 3, the prophet says, "This is what the sovereign Yahweh says. Look, I'm against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great monster or the great Tanin lying in the middle of its waterways, who said, 'My Nile is my own. I made it for myself.'" So the prophet Ezekiel, as well as the prophet Isaiah, pictures Pharaoh as a sea serpent, mucking about in the Nile and messing things up. And that makes this scene all the more pertinent. And probably the prophets are drawing on these events that happened in Egypt and the recounting of the events in Exodus, associating the sea serpent with Pharaoh. Okay, so next week when we come back, we'll consider what happens in verses 11 through 13 when Pharaoh tries to replicate the sign. But for now, I want you to sit with this idea that Pharaoh asked for the signs and that the precise sign that God chose is an attack against Pharaoh's claim of royal authority, and we'll see how that turns out next week. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, if you're a new viewer or you just haven't gotten around to it, there's a little button down below. I encourage you to click on that button to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Have a great week.